Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah and today we're going to be checking out this piece of metal, the Real Steel G5 Metamorph. I was contacted by Eric from Indiana Knives and he actually asked if I wanted to experience this knife, so he sent one my way. So full disclosure, this was provided by Indiana Knives for review purposes. I made sure that he was aware I was going to give it the full dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and the terrible. He said that was okay and still sent it along. Hopefully that doesn't affect my opinion. I'll do my best to keep it from. First thing we should do is get into our size comparisons. We've got the usual suspects in the PM2 and the Para 3 by Spyderco. This is a kind of an unusual size. The blade length is 3.54, so just over the 3.5 inch mark for the blade length. And then the steel type that we're using here is N690. The blade thickness is 0.12 inches, which is nice and thin. The overall length is 8 inches, 0.15. Let's get a couple other comparisons in. This is in the budget knife category, so I think it's probably a good idea to compare it to some other budget options. Now, this would be something in the same general blade length category, a little bit shorter blade length, but in the right wheelhouse. And then for features and price, I think the closest example I personally have is the Civivi McKenna. That's the Plethrios, by the way. I haven't done a review on that, but it will be soon. I know that there's been some comparison to the Booz Blade Smoke, which I find interesting. I can see some similarities in the profile. Blade shape is kind of in the same wheelhouse. They're both front flippers. This is $220-ish. This is $60. So definitely some major differences. But I can see, if I squint my eyes a little bit, how somebody could compare these two. I think most people that are in the market for a budget knife in this price aren't necessarily trying to talk themselves up to a Booz Blades smoke. I could be wrong about that though, and this knife definitely is much more difficult to find. So it could just be you want something like this, you could buy yourself a cheap little budget knife in the meantime to kind of mess around with. So there's something to be said about that. Now let's get into the dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and the terrible of this piece of metal. First thing I want to talk about is the differences between this exclusive from Indiana Knives and the normal just G5 Metamorph. First thing is this is a G10 handle, and I think this is a perfect change. I'm really pleased that Eric asked them to do this. I think this solves the primary issue with the knife. I actually handled the normal aluminum Metamorph. I borrowed that knife from Nick Shabazz. I never did a review on it. I liked the knife a lot, but it was just so darn slippery. I ended up not doing the review because I was just going to complain about that the whole time. And so I didn't do the review. But I'm really glad that Eric reached out to me and sent this along because that perfectly solved the issue that the main issue that I had with the Metamorph before. So G10 here is great. Not near as slippery, perfect griptitude. I mean, it feels, like normal texture G10. So very similar feel to, just a Spyderco. So that's a good knife in terms of, practicality to emulate. And I think that was a wise decision. I'm not too worried about the strength of this going down. You can see there are some stainless steel liners going on inside, so it's not like you're giving up any kind of strength from the knife making that switch. And then I mentioned earlier the difference in blade steel. This, we're looking at the N690. It used to be 14C 28N. Not too many people have a lot of experience with both those steels to have too strong of an opinion, but in general, I think most of us can agree that N690 is a little bit better. It's somewhere in the VG10 wheelhouse of stainless steel. It's pretty easy to sharpen, but you're going to need to sharpen it, more often than any other super steel that somebody would get on a more expensive knife. So I think N690 is pretty good. I mean, if you go to some knife makers, that's like the only steel they use. Like even on their high-end custom stuff, they're using that, especially down in South Africa. That's the easiest steel for them to get their hands on at a reasonable price. So, if an entire country builds their knives on the backbone of that steel, I'm sure we're going to do okay on this one. Next thing is just the blade shape and finish. This is kind of a interesting design on the blade shape. You have a swedge along the top, but the swedge doesn't go actually to the point. I don't necessarily think it needs to. I think it just ends up being more of a visual thing than anything else. Usually a swedge can actually help with like penetrating cuts. Something like the Koenig Arius, for instance. It's not a super pointy tip, but since that swedge is there, it kind of helps the matter along a little bit. Since it's not actually getting to the tip of the knife, I don't know how much practical benefit you're going to get from that. But it looks cool, and I don't think it takes away from the knife by having it there. The blade thickness, 0.12 inches is fine. That's good. You don't have a lot of blade height to grind that down, so it's not like this is the all-time greatest slicer, but you don't have to work it through too much to get it sliced through cheese or something like that. It reminds me a lot of the new Benchmade knife that kind of has a similar blade shape. What is it called? It's like the Fact, I think it's called. Kind of similar, very stabby. It's almost like a little X-Acto knife. I mean, for detailed, kind of finer cuts, getting into clamshell, this sucker is a beast. So I like the blade shape. It's unique, and it does, as advertised, I suppose. The ergos on this are decent. It's definitely nothing really nitpicky. The point on the clip is a little bit, if you like, bear down, but I think most people it's going to land in a good spot where normally it's not jabbing you like here or here. If it fits right here, it doesn't usually bother us too much, but everybody's hand shapes are a little bit different, so that might be an issue. The cutout right here is something I like. Gives your fingers something to grab onto. Again, this was a major issue when the knife was slippery. There just wasn't a lot going on to keep it, in your hand, both while using and while trying to open the dang thing. So I think, overall the ergonomics improved like quadruple just by the virtue of you can hang on to the knife and, it's completely competent. Otherwise, as far as the ergonomics go. Now, technically, this is the third version of the Metamorph. The very first version didn't have a deep carry pocket clip, and so in the second version they updated that. It was still aluminum, but they had some milling on the aluminum to try to help with the slipperiness. That's the version that I got from Nick, so even that version I felt was too slippery, but they did a good job of keeping the deep carry clip on this third version that they've partnered with Indiana Knives for. Great choice. There is a logo on there, but it's not too distracting. If you have something like a word or ZT, billboarding, it can look a little tacky in your pocket if you're, depending on your work life and all that. But I think this is, subtle enough that I don't think anybody's going to be like, oh, do you support that company? They don't know what this is. So that's totally fine. Ramp gets in, pretty good. Plenty of spring to it. The screws do come up a little bit. So if you have like really thick jeans, you might have to kind of squeeze it up and over those screws a little bit to get it actually all the way in. Not the end of the world. It's not like I couldn't get it in. It's just you might have to kind of jab it in a little bit to finish it. This knife does have a place to hook a lanyard, little post in the back. This is several knives in a row that I've happily seen. They've decided to put the lanyard in a good spot. I think the industry is going in the right direction, having, if not deep carry pocket clips, deeper carry pocket clips, and not, completely compromising the position of the clip with a weirdly placed, lanyard hole somewhere. So this is a perfect solution. It's out of the way of the blade when it's shut, and it's not clashing with the pocket clip. Visually, it looks great. It doesn't break any of the lines, but it's there for the people that want it. Excellent. I like that a lot. The fit and finish on this little guy is actually pretty decent. It's pretty darn near centered. It's maybe, 53% favoring the pocket clip side, but for a budget knife, that's pretty good. I'm not complaining too hard about that. Everything else lined up. I took the knife apart, and a lot of stuff just kind of falls apart when you take it apart. There's one pin along with the two pins, along with the screw holding the back spacer in place. So you got to make sure you don't lose the little posts on that. This little post for the lanyard hole kind of pops out. So it's not difficult. You just, before you take it apart, be over your table, make sure that it's not just going to all jump into the carpet and you're going to have to hunt around for all the pieces and not even know what you're missing. So be careful with that. Another interesting thing, I took pictures of this. I'll show this right now, but on the inside, there's this new kind of contraption. This is the first time I've seen it. It's called needle bearings, which is kind of a cross between bearings and a washer. Really, really interesting. So I took it apart and I was like, what the heck is this? I lubed it up. I used my normal nano oil, and it turned out that was perfect. It works great. I'll talk more about the action here in a second, but as far as the fit and finish goes, really good at this price. I'm very, very, very pleased. It was easy to put everything back together. Everything fit correctly. It wasn't like I was making the action or the centering any worse. Everything went together nicely. Finally, in the decent is the action. So we're going through the OCD, the open, the close, and the disengage. Now, the open, it's kind of been a journey for me. The problem that I had and why I didn't review the normal version of the Metamorph is that the slippiness of the actual aluminum scales was kind of the obvious problem with it, but really it combined with another issue, which is getting the correct placement or handle on the knife before you even attempt to front flip it. And what I mean by that is a classical issue that you have with front flippers is that if you hold it like this and your thumb is moving this way, for a moment in time, the knife doesn't have an opposable appendage, thumb. And so you're kind of at risk of it dropping out of your hand. And so with the aluminum one, that just meant that you'd get ready to do it and you're like, I don't want to try it that way. And so I would do this lame version, where I push it directly against my hand where I'm not going to fall, it pops out, and then I reach around and slowly open it that way. That was kind of the safe way to open it before. But now that the whole thing is made out of G10, even though it's still awkwardly shaped to find a good grip on the knife, there you go. Okay. All right. So it's this very careful grip that you have to not get in the way of the blade coming out. And that's the hardest part of opening this damn knife. There we go. Okay. So you kind of have to put it into the bottom palm of your pinky, I guess, so that you're not covering. Because I want to hold the knife like that, but I can't. Obviously, I'm holding the blade down. So you're kind of doing this thing, and it's so tall. It's such a long knife that you don't get to really cram it down into this hole because now I can't reach and get all the way over. So you have to kind of drive it down this way, and then you can kind of open it up like normal. It took me an hour or two to figure this all out, and even then I forget exactly how I got it. And then sometimes I just grab the knife and I open it. I don't even think about it, and it's not an issue. But other times I have to really relearn how to open it. You can get it. It's not the action itself that's a problem. The action, the detent, is great. I wish that this was a little bit taller just to make it more idiot-proof for me, an idiot. But more it has to do with getting the grip on the knife so that you're not, pushing the knife out of the bottom of your hand when you're pushing the top where it's falling out that way. Or, I don't have, the clip is so small and so far low. Normally you're grabbing onto the clip, like a chamois or even like this. Like I can grab that. I have great control of the knife just by grabbing onto the clip, and the clip goes up so high that that's all I need to kind of handle. I don't even have to like grip it on the top side. I can open it from here. And that you don't realize how much you rely on that until you take it away, until it's so tall. I mean, if we look at the difference in height, and you make the clip way smaller and not near as high, and now you don't have that anchor point, and then the knife is so thin that your fingers are just getting in the way. The point is, it's gonna take practice. If you haven't had a front flipper before, this is gonna be really frustrating to you at first. You can get it. It's there. It's like you gotta find just where to like scratch that itch, and then once you get it, you've got it. I will say this is the hardest to flip front flipper I've ever had. Everything else I just grab and I can do, pretty much no matter what. This one, you gotta know the secret. For the disengage, I have some good news. So really, really, really deep open chamfer here. It is going, on this side instead of on this side, but it works enough because it's so wide and open that I can get in there. This I could see from the show side. That's not a problem. It's, heavily kind of jimped right there, and it's super duper easy to disengage. It being a steel liner lock, there's no lock stick, so disengaging is not a problem at all. For the drop, this is incredibly good. Once the detent ball is on the tang of the blade, it's one jostle and it shuts. It wasn't quite this smooth when I first got it, but it has definitely broken in and is a very good smooth action. And it took a full day before it was like completely smooth like this to where I can actually go through the whole gambit. So again, the only thing I'm struggling on is holding the knife. The actual flipping action itself is good. It's just, it can drop out. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the excellent things. First thing I want to talk about is the EDC ability of this knife. It's extremely lightweight, and it's got a really great, silhouette in your pocket. It's straight, it's skinny, it's relatively thin, and there's nothing really to snag anything on. The back spacer goes so deep, you're not going to cut yourself on anything on the back, which is usually a worry for something this thin. It's great. Deep carry. No complaints whatsoever, and that's why it makes its way into the excellent. Next thing, cutting on this is actually pretty fun. Like I mentioned, it's a little X-Acto knife, and so it's easy to get in and just shoop, shoop, shoop. Came to me really, really, really sharp. I shouldn't have too much of a problem sharpening this when I need to. Again, that N690 is pretty easy to sharpen, so not too worried about that. It's kind of all belly, really, but, for most tasks, I don't think that's going to matter. Missing straights, it's a subtle edge anyway. Last excellent thing is the price. This is clocking in at $59.60 on Indiana Knives. I'm trying to rush this review out a little bit because I do want to make sure you can get this knife if you are a fan of it. I think once he runs out, it's going to be a little while before he gets more. So you want to kind of be a part of this first little bit. Will be cool. There are a few nitpicks about the knife. The first one is extremely nitpicky, but the print on this is a little spotty. Just the end is not entirely full there. It's kind of wordy and weird combination of fonts on this side. This side is fine, the real steel. It's mostly just this. It's a little busy and just not as good looking as I would want it to be. Next nitpick is just the random length of the knife. It being 3.54-ish. It just puts it in that ambiguous place where you're not entirely sure if your laws are at the 3.5. You're probably, if you're already upset with, if the cop is already upset with you in the first place to even check, they're probably going to ding you on this one. It's just kind of a silly length. I have knives longer than that, but they're, close to 4, but not over 4. It's, I think, smarter to err on the side just under. If this was 3.4, I think I would be a lot more high on the blade length, obviously. That's just a good size anyway. Final nitpick is just the holding the knife problem when you're trying to hold it to open it. Once you get the muscle memory down, it's not too bad, but it's going to take you a while to find it, is what I'm guessing. It's a weirdly shaped front flipper. You know, usually front flippers aren't quite that long to where, you know, you can't hold it here because your fingers are going to reach over and block the blade. And so it's, I don't know. You're just going to have to trust me on this one. It's awkward to hold. For the terrible, I don't have anything terrible here. I think the slick scales of the previous 2 generations was like ultra terrible. It made me not even want to review the knife. So churning that around to G10, I think, was the single best change you can make to a knife, to just take it for something I have zero interest in to something that I'm quite happy to have in my collection. And so if you like the profile of this knife, you like the idea of a front flipper with really good action, something that's good to fidget with once you get it down, is really easy to stick in your pocket, I think this is a great knife. I mean, comparing it to the McKenna, I think, is the hardest sell, because the action on this is just even better and a little bit, you know, idiot proof in that regard. Of it's just out of the box, ready to go. You don't have to learn anything. It's that quick and easy. Steels are, you know, in the same ballpark. You know, this is D2. It's going to rust a little bit easier than the N690 would, but probably have better edge retention than the N690. I think they're comparable. This knife is more expensive. I mean, it's a good $10, $15 more. So keep that in mind. But this is so much more lightweight. I think it's the right blade length for something that, you know, is just going to be a little tiny EDC in your pocket. This isn't really beefy enough to be a hard use knife. It's just long enough to make the negatives of having a long knife relevant, but not the benefits of, you know, just being small and in your pocket. Ultimately, I think it's a good little knife, and I could easily recommend this to somebody in the hunt for a budget knife and or a front flipper. I think this is a good way to kind of lick your chops. If you can get this knife down on the front flipping, then that pretty much unlocks you to all the other knives that front flip, and it'll just be way easier to do most other ones. Not to say this is bad action, it's just a little bit more finesse required. So if you like just diving in on the hard thing first, and then, you know, that prepares you for all the easier things, that might not be a bad idea. I think that could be, you know, something people enjoy doing. I hope this review was helpful to you. I'll catch you in my next video. Bye! Okay, so here it is. Boom. Nope. There. I can. You can do it, guys. I'm hamming it up a little bit